Hi folks, this is Caleb Baumgartner, producer of Local SEO Tactics. Thank you for downloading episode 1 of our two-part interview with expert Terry Samuels. This interview was so packed with great information for our listeners that we didn't want to cut anything out, so we chose to split this one up. Today you'll learn about Schema and how it affects your website rankings and how it can help you maintain a well-ranking, clutter-free site. A quick aside before we jump into the episode. We here at Local SEO Tactics are looking for feedback from our listeners about our upcoming SEO courses that we're designing. Jesse and Bob mentioned this project in the last episode, so if you're looking for details, check that out. We are designing these courses with you in mind, so if you have any topics you're looking for help on, we'd love to hear about it. Now, on with the show.
Welcome back to Local SEO Tactics, where we bring you tips and tricks to get found online. I'm your host, Jesse Dolan, here this episode not just with only Bob Brennan, but we got Terry Samuels of Salterra Web and SEO here. And we're going to skip the usual promotions, self-promotions and all that here. And we're going to dive right into this interview and question and answer with Terry. Before we do that, though, I'll set the stage for you, Terry. If you guys and gals out there haven't heard of Terry Samuels, he is definitely one of the foremost people kind of in the SEO space. Founder, owner of Salterra Web Design and SEO out of down in Arizona, Scottsdale, right, Terry? Technically, is that where you're headquartered? World headquarters. Terry is also the owner and coordinator, I guess, if you will, of SEO Spring Training, which has been an awesome SEO event, virtually, digital and virtual this last year because of COVID, but otherwise a pretty elite group of people there for that event. Terry's been a speaker and a presenter at different SEO conferences, of course, his own SEO Spring Training. Most recently, I caught Terry at SEO Rockstars, which was an awesome event, again, digital this year. And of course, Terry has been a veteran serving in the Navy for the country. So long and storied career and all kinds of things, eventually landing, like all of us, in SEO through a windy path. So within the SEO space, Terry is, at least in my mind, Terry, you do a ton of stuff, of course, but is like the schema expert. Something we really haven't talked a ton about on this show yet is a schema. We've referenced it, and we've got a ton of questions about it. So we thought, who better to bring on than Terry? We use Terry for schema. We've done some projects together. I've learned personally a ton of stuff from Terry through his teachings and his speaking. And super excited to have you on, Terry, to teach to people, to start digging into schema and crack this one open. It's definitely a bit more mysterious than your typical SEO stuff. So appreciate you coming on.
No problem. Happy to be here.
So let's just kick off. Like we talked, and just to kind of tease everybody too, we're going to have Terry on multiple episodes. This one here today, we're just going to kind of do an overview of what is schema and be very general. But at the end, we'll ask again for you to send in questions as we go through this. Hopefully some of the things Terry's going to be talking about will spur your mind for how you can implement schema, what it can do for your site and your business. Submit questions. We'll have Terry on again. We'll answer those questions. We'll dive deeper, maybe do some tutorials and some more in-depth stuff like that. Go to localseotactics.com, bottom left corner, the link for the submit a question. Just use that, reference Terry, reference schema. We'll know what you're talking about. And we'll save those for future episodes with Terry. So setting that aside, Terry, let's just kind of dig in. I don't think we need to do any of the typical like edification, who you are, why you're knowledgeable. We'll just throw it out there. You're a schema guru. You're a schema expert. You know a ton of it. And if people don't trust that, just Google Terry, look up some things and listen to this episode and you'll get that. So in your mind, Terry, like what is schema? If somebody stops you on the street or a new client saying, okay, I've heard about this schema. What is it? Why does it even matter to me? How would you reply to that?
Schema is basically a way to tell the search engines not just more about your site or your brand or your organization, but basically everything about your site, brand, or organization. Your different services, everything. So schema gives you the opportunity in anybody's kind of mind of web design. Schema gives you an opportunity to basically build another website that Googlebot sees. And I think the power of schema is twofold. One is it should be, if not, it should be. Everything should be in the head for your schema. So there's a couple different types of schema that are popular, microdata, and then JSON LD. JSON LD is the most popular. and in my mind, the best to use. You can also install Schema through Google Tag Manager. But Schema basically, it was founded by Google, Microsoft, Yandex, and Yahoo. So it's a markup that the major search engines all see and they can crawl. So one of the foundational reasons why I think Schema is so powerful today is because of the way open source WordPress design, Joomla design, Drupal design, any of the open source platforms have always had problems with crawl. And by that, I mean going from the top of the head to the bottom of the footer.
On a single page, you're talking there, right? Like when you say
Single
that.
page.
Okay.
Exactly. So Googlebot or Bingbot or whoever would hit the website and it would crawl, but it might only get maybe 50% of the page because it saw something in there that stopped the crawl. It could be a code, it could be something. But what Schema does is Schema puts all this information in the head before it even gets to the body. So it's got some powerful opportunity for you to introduce things to the Google bots or the different search bots that you might or might not show on the public side. So it's really got some powerful things you can do with it. They've given us all the opportunity to do it. The negative side of Schema is that it's not something you can just install on a plugin and say, okay, I'm good to go with my Schema. And only because a lot of the power in Schema is stuff that a plugin is not going to be able to do for you. And we can get that into later on different sessions. But that's basically what Schema is. It's a markup that's only the bots can see. The public cannot, unless they know how to view page source, that type of stuff. But it's just a different way for us to get the understanding about what my web page / my website is all about is through Schema. So.
In your mind, is it like a critical thing you have to have on your website? You throw your page up, you got your content, you've done some keywords and you're targeting your content. If you do or don't have Schema, do you see that as like a cardinal sin or not for your site or your success?
It all depends. Again, I hate that it all depends. But Schema is not the end all to be all. Schema is what I would say is the boost to what you should have already done already. And I say that with a broad sense. If you're a member of SIA, I actually built a website with nothing but Schema. There is no public content anywhere. And I have this website ranking on the first page for about 6 different terms. So we do know that Schema is important. We do know that at least Google and Bing give credit for Schema. But actually having it at doing that and not worrying about titles and descriptions and header tags and everything else, I think that would be the cardinal sin. So,
sure.
But I think even worse is assuming you have Schema that's helping you if you just installed Yoast, for instance. So that would be the misconception. It's not that it's obviously it didn't hurt you that you have Yoast Schema, but it's just not helping you as much as you can help yourself by doing it. We call it the advanced way.
Okay, let's dive into that real quick. If somebody were to use like a Yoast or some of the other plugins that say they have Schema support or allow you to do Schema, what are some of the things? Because maybe people choose that, like, hey, Terry's saying it's better than nothing, so I'll start there. If they did do that, what are some of the things they want to do? Organization, local business. What are some of the standard things you might find with a plugin doing Schema?
Well, Yoast is going to charge you extra money if you want to do local business, if you want to do WooCommerce. They've got advanced plugins for that. There's others, SEO tools like Rank Math, SEO Press Pro. They give you opportunities to do local schema, breadcrumb schema, that type of stuff. So anything that you can kind of tie your website with certain links, you can probably do through a plugin. What you can't do through a plugin is the stuff that they just aren't going to go out and find. So say, for instance, you're doing schema for a doctor. Well, these tools are not going to go out and find everything about Dr. Brown. They're not going to go out and find that Dr. Brown has, degrees from 4 different colleges. They're not going to go out and find that Dr. Brown is associated with 2 different hospitals and, 3 different clinics, and he does charity work for XYZ. These tools aren't going to go out there and find that. So in order for the power of this stuff to work, you need to go out and find that stuff. And so now, because a lot of people will put down, yeah, Dr. Brown got a master's degree from ASU University. That might be on his bio page or something. But we all know how powerful authority and trust and all the different factors we need to do from a top level down. So when you start putting in all the different variables for Dr. Brown in Schema, he started out at Scottsdale Community College. He graduated in 1982. He went on to ASU. Just the track of his education, the stuff he's associated with, some of the awards and stuff he might have won. Now all this is in Schema, and now all of a sudden Dr. Brown's authority is just going up tenfold, because now you have all this information in there about Dr. Brown. You have the links to the university and the awards and the different associations he's involved in the Schema. So you're basically just introducing Google to a new Dr. Brown. They knew the Dr. Brown on the bio page, but now they get to see a whole new Dr. Brown. They get to see his personal LinkedIn page. They get to see his, the speech he did with the Channel 10 news station. So all the different things that Schema plugins are never going to be able to find are the important stuff that makes Schema so powerful.
And in your example there, the Dr. Brown, kind of what's running through my mind is maybe you have a page on your site, like you said, with the bio, or Dr. Brown has on his site for his bio. Trying to envision all these things you're talking about, all those references, that might look like a real clunky, not very attractive page. And maybe all that doesn't even matter to the users and to the readers, but you can jam all that into the coding of the Schema, not seen by human eyes, but yet you provide this gigantic index of all this information, right? About Dr. Brown. So Googlebot and things like that can really parse that out and kind of fill their knowledge base, their database more about what he is, and pull all this in together. Okay.
For sure. And you can do that on so many different levels in Schema. Think of Dr. Brown has 2 different offices. Well, now you can start doing location schema for each one. That might not look real great for the public eye, but it's definitely going to give, geo authority, geo relevance to Dr. Brown's office, in Scottsdale. So all the different pieces that schema.org, which is kind of the Schema Bible site, gives us to, let the bots, let the different, codes that are different bots that are calling the website to see just more stuff about the page that they're on. So, I get a lot of people that tell me, why I only want 300 or 400 words on my page. Well, I'll put 1,000 words in Schema. So I'll get the benefit. So I'm not going to tell people, okay, well, we can only live with 300 or 400 words, because we know from a ranking perspective that's light content. That light content is not paid attention to very often. So we can change that by adding more words to the Schema.
So does Schema become more important on, let's say, more competitive, but either a keyword or search term or an industry might be? Do you feel Schema just plays a bigger role?
I think it plays a bigger role in a lot of high competition areas, but the one thing also is that the people that are doing the Schema that we do, for instance, there's not many people doing it. I just got done with a big Schema project for a lawyer in LA, and I was amazed at how non-Schema that was in that industry. The 10 websites that I use as my, audit system, then didn't have much of anything. Some of them had a little bit better than the others, but nobody really had, you could tell nobody put a lot of time, effort, and energy into it. It didn't really make sense. So there's 2 things that I love about Schema on the technical side is, one, that I can stack Schema. So stacking Schema means that you would have, a medical clinic schema for Dr. Brown, but then you'd also have a physician schema for Dr. Brown. So I get to have two different schemas at two different levels. So the medical business might be site-wide because that's what the business is.
Right.
But then Dr. Brown might be physician if he's got Dr. Steve also, if he's got Dr. Mary, so now you can break this schema down to where you're stacking it. So your Dr. Brown page is going to have a medical clinic schema. It's going to have a physician schema. It's going to have a number of different things that we can do that it makes sense. So, and you can also do it from a silo perspective. So let's say, for instance, that Dr. Brown specializes in back surgery, or back pain. So under back surgery, there might be 3 or 4 different types of back surgery that Dr. Brown does. Well, I can silo that within the schema also. So Google's also getting a way to crawl pages from schema that otherwise there might not be a link to down in the body of the text.
Right.
So kind of gives you an idea of the different things you can do on a broader sense of schema. So, and again, that's stuff the plugins just aren't going to do. They're not going to go out and say, hey, we can link, the, fusion page to the, hot fusion, to all the different types of back services or back surgeries to this one page. A plugin would never be able to do that. So, so the biggest thing, is just, think of all the different things that we can do with schema, and then we're going to kind of walk you through it through the next session. But it actually gets pretty crazy. All the things you can do. I don't stuff them with keywords. That's like my big pet peeve. I don't do stupid schema. And I've seen stupid schema. I've seen people send me, hey, Terry, come check out the schema that I just built. And it's basically saying the same thing 5 or 6 times through the schema. Well, that gets to be stupid schema. So, if you're a plumber that specializes in the hot water heaters, you don't want to have a plumber hot water heater schema and then have a separate hot water heater schema. I mean, it just gets to be monotonous. And so, doing it right, it should take you time. One of the reasons that I know a lot of people don't do it this way is because it takes a lot of time. It can literally take you days just to do a real good schema for a website. So,
and you're trying to be clean with this, right? Because this is a bot-centric thing, right? So,
yep.
I've heard other people say that Google has only got so much time and resources to crawl so many sites, and if yours is a mess, they're going to move on. And if your schema is tight and clean, I would assume that's going to help with your footing, your ranking, and everything.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. And again, you can use different variables. One of the things that we do a lot with schema is like misspelled keywords. So misspelled keywords is something that we all deal with,
right?
But can't really deal with it on the public side. Like you can't have a paragraph about marijuana and spell it wrong 3 times in the paragraph. It'll just look. The public's not going to know why you're doing it. Well, guess what? We can do that in schema. We can misspell the word marijuana in 3 different places throughout a 600 word description. So there's different ways you can kind of just make sure, like I said, my big thing is that I want Google to know everything they can know about my page before they even hit my page. So that makes sense.
When you're saying that too, you mentioned it earlier, and I think if people missed it, like huge pro tip, when you got your schema, inject that into the head of your page, which is what you're saying right there, right? Like before they even get into the actual parsing out the content on the page, your actual text and pictures, they're reading everything in that schema first as far as an order of operations, right?
Exactly.
If it's in the head. So yeah.
If it's in the head and it matches, it's about what's on the page. So you can't put video schema on a page that doesn't have a video, so you have to do things right. And like Bob said, you have to keep it clean because, it's the same thing. You can't put reviews in your schema if those reviews aren't on your page, so, Google's smart enough to know that what schema is there for, and they appreciate all the different variables we give them, and it's through different research and through different tools. I mean, some of the stuff we do will just freak people out. Like I have part of my schema now is even included in my keyword research audit. So because a lot of stuff about abouts and mentions, which Google's gotten very good at. If you go out and you Google, Bob's Laundry Service, and you start looking the first 5, 6, 7 pages about Bob's Laundry Service, you're going to find out some pretty interesting things that Google starts putting in there for Bob's Laundry Service. It might be Mary's Laundry Service. Well, that's your number one competitor. Well, those are the same abouts. You're both laundry people. You're both going to feed off each other. So as you go out and you do these what's called abouts and mentions, that has more to do with the authority level of what you're doing, whether it be brand or service or whatever. But you go out and you just search the internet. What does Google think about Terry Samuels? And now all of a sudden you start seeing things, and you include those powerful things in your schema. So if there's an article from an award I won in 2017 that's on page 3, guess what? I'm going to put it in my schema, because I want Google to go back and notice that again, because it brought us some business. It's definitely relevant. It definitely helps my authority. So all the different things you can do that through schema. So it's what we're going to show you guys is just going to be pretty crazy as we go through this thing. But
I think what you're mentioning there too, for people, you think about SEO, you think about optimizing the page, the content, the keywords, it's kind of all on page type stuff, where this is not only, behind the scenes, human beings won't read it, but it's also, like you just said, it's really for building that entity level, that trust, that authority. Can you, and I think the answer is yes, correct me if I'm wrong, but can you optimize that with keywords and inject phrases? Sure, right?
Sure.
Like,
yeah, for sure. You
include
definitely
that, but
we write the same way. So
okay.
There's a keyword area in schema, the old keyword area that we used to do back before Google ignored it. So, and we use that, but we do it with what Google tells us we should be keywords for that page. And they might not be keywords we would go after in the content. Once you start doing abouts and mentions on the keyword level, you find out real quick, well, maybe Dr. Brown is also known as a chiropractor. Maybe he was a chiropractor years ago, or something.
Yeah.
So that type of stuff gets filtered back in too. So, and again, that's just stuff you wouldn't probably put on the public side. And, and it's not that you're trying to hide anything from the public, but we all know that keeping people on page is something that we want to do. But in America, we're not going to do it with 2,500 words. We don't read. We would be better off having 3 videos.
Right.
Right. People have time on page. So, but we also know how important that is for to gain authority and to gain trust and to gain rankings and to purchase, be able to get links without purchasing them. So there's all kinds of things you can do throughout this process. And it helps, like I said, and I use this in small towns, I use this in big towns. This is probably, in my mind, a bigger step than the old really good on page, but I think if you have both, you're pretty much undeniable. So if you have really solid on page and a really solid schema and continue to use schema, so if you do a new blog, about something that you are passionate about, the article schema will probably take you longer to do than the blog itself. That's how much information is in there. Sure. But again, it just gives Google another way to show you how powerful this blog is. And if you're set up to a syndication network, now that just all feeds out to everything. So, and schema can just be tied in. The challenge with schema is once you find something new that works, is like we've talked about, is going back and implementing it on the right pages. Because we test schema all the time. So we're always constantly adding and finding different ways to do different things that'll bring more power to the map or bring more power to the review section. Maybe we're trying to boost a review and we're doing that through schema. So there's all kinds of different things we can do through that.
And on that, for testing too, I want to back up. I wrote a note because you mentioned it quick, and we had Kyle Roof on for your interview a number of episodes back. Mm-hmm. And I think Bob asked him a question, like, if you're trying to vet out an SEO agency, what's one thing you'd ask him? And he's like, are you testing things, right? Like, you've got to be testing things.
Yep.
You mentioned SIA. Would you mind pausing there and just telling everybody what that is quick? I think that's pretty important if you're interested in testing, right? So
Yeah, the SIA is probably in my mind the largest SEO testing environment out there. It's a group. It's very reasonable if you have a little bit of capital to spend on something for training, because this is it. Not only do they test, but they teach you what they did. And the tests are ongoing. So like I said, it's something that, I've got to do a 90-day markup on the Schema website that I did. And so the tests kind of never go away, especially if it's something that could change. But SIA is Search Intelligence
Association, I think.
Yeah, Search Intelligence Association. They also do SEO Rockstars.
Okay.
But yeah, they're a top-notch group. Ted, Clint, myself, Kyle has some stuff in there. But yeah, there's some good stuff in there as far as, especially after, I like it as soon as a week after there's been an algo update, I'll go into SIA because 3 or 4 people in there have already tested what happened in this algorithm update.
Right.
So it just saves me time. Could I do it? Well, sure. But why would I if 3 or 4 other people are doing it already? So yeah, just it's always good to train. It's always good to test. I get so frustrated with people when they send me websites that either got messed up or dropped or whatever. And I can tell it was something that somebody learned in some SEO group and they didn't test it first. They just went right to their client site and did it. And it's like, wow.
This must be gospel. We'll just implement this.
And there's a lot of good stuff you can get from groups. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying that test it in an environment that's not going to hurt your clients and upset your clients. And
like you said earlier, kind of as a dismissing comment within the SEO industry, it's a joke where the answer is it depends. Yeah. And I think this rings true of what you're saying. Just because you learned something and somebody showed that it worked in some kind of case study for that particular client or market or whatever, it may not be effective. Might work on 99 other things, but the one thing maybe not. So to learn what you're doing. And the reason I brought up that testing, not just to get back to the SIA, which I think is important, but also like you mentioned with Schema, it's kind of ongoing. I don't know if you have any kind of way to quantify it, but I'll just throw out there generally, like it's always evolving. They're always adding new elements, new things you can tag, if you will. So to test what works, what doesn't, even within that, because there's just new stuff. I don't know if you can comment on it even, but like how old is Schema and schema.org and this overall collaboration? It's what, 3-5 years? That's not a 10 or 15-year-old type adaptation.
It's been around for a little while, but it's really only gained traction. Probably, they're in version 11 now, so it's probably 3 years old, I would guess. But it's really only gained traction about 1.5 years ago. And I really believe it gained traction because of the crawl issues from open source. I really think that, I've been developing software since 1990. So, I've seen, and Google used to we used to have what's called a fetch and render tool. And that fetch and render tool used to give us, webmasters, a way to see how much a page was crawled. Yeah. And it really became a problem about 2 years ago. That Google was just having problems getting to the bottom of the web page. So that's when I think Schema kind of got a little bit more important. Yoast has been playing with it for years, but it was so basic. It was like, yeah, here's my brand name, here's my logo.
Yeah.
It was really nothing, but I think as people started figuring out how it can be, and I say this in a broad sense, a good sense, how it can be exploited. It's a markup that these, you figure you put Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, and Yandex in a room and say, hey, let's come up with a new code that we can all read. It's probably something we're going to be able to do pretty cool things with. I don't think everybody really kind of looked at it and said, well, that doesn't really make sense. And then people definitely started using it wrong a long time ago, just stuffing it. People used to use Schema just to stuff keywords in it. Plumber East, plumber West, plumber North. It was just ridiculous, how much was being done. And then they started penalizing people for Schema. And that was about 2 years ago. They started penalizing you for your Schema. And most people had no idea what the frick that even meant. And so, it just kind of started slowly gaining things. But I think nowadays, we're at the exciting point because we've got a huge group of people that are doing it and doing it very successfully. And you've got a huge group of people that want to do it and they want to do it successfully, but they don't know how. And then you got the other group of people that have Yoast and they think they're doing it okay. So, so you have three different groups right now, and the people that are doing it well and the people that want to do it well, those are the people that are going to be, that really have an opportunity. So I tell people, if you're in a plumber industry in Dallas, and you know, that's kind of a bad example because I did the schema for one there. So, but if you're in even a major city and you look at the top 10 people, you're going to be lucky to see maybe 2 that do the schema on the level that we do. And then it's a matter of, you know, what components are they doing within that schema? Because we figured out, you know, what the schema ID should be for the most power. And we figured that out. So a lot of people would just put a web page. Well, you need to do it through Google property. And we all know that the most powerful Google property we have is the map, is the GMB. So so we figured that out. So when I see this huge schema and they're just using the page itself as the ID, I know right there we've got an opportunity to do something completely different, you know. And so it just gets into little minute things like that after you get towards the end of what we're getting ready to show everybody, to say, okay, yeah, this competitor has all this schema, but let's see what he really has. And so, because there's a lot of things people miss. A lot of people miss the alumni, the, you know, organizations, you know, all the stuff that is really powerful on the brand level, you know. And I tell people, you know, you're not a plumber in Dallas, you're a plumber. You know, get the Dallas part out. So, you know, so we need to find out everything there is to know about Joe the plumber. You know, and if Joe the plumber doesn't have much stuff out there, then we need to know, then we know what we need to go out and build for Joe the plumber. So, you know, it's just, it's kind of thinking differently than, you know, SEO or even web design, where you can say, okay, here's this big block of wood. What else can I add to it that'll give me a prettier block of wood that on the code side? Because it's not prettier for, obviously, you know, I showed one of my medical spas one of the schemas that she has on her site. She's like, oh my gosh, you know, and it's pretty much 4 times, her schema is probably 4 times the size of her entire website, you know, as far as words. So she was one of the ones that fought me on adding text to pages. Well, okay, just keep fighting me. I'll add it to schema. So I'll get my point across in order to rank that keyword. So,
well, and with that, the complexity, the length of it, if you will, things like that. You mentioned schema.org earlier.
Yeah,
we'll put a link to that and then the show notes for everybody. That is basically, would you say, like the repository of all the elements or all the things that you can apply or use schema with, correct?
Yeah, but it's a hodgepodge. You know, a lot of the elements will give you an example, and you know, they'll give you a microdata example and a JSON example and stuff like that. And you can, you know, you can start with that example, and then, but there's so much more you can add to it. So the example they give you is very broad. So the biggest thing I see people get frustrated with is it is basically writing code, and you need to think in brackets, arrows, and parentheses. So, you know, one of the things that when I built my very first one, that was like my template. And that template just kind of just grew into all the different schemas that I've done since then, because I at least had the kind of code, you know, or the kind of code, you know, when you spend 2 hours trying to figure out that you're missing a closed bracket, it gets very freaking frustrating. So, and so that's what I mean. It's a hodgepodge. It says, okay, you can include these 15 things with this type of schema, and you expand to that, to one of those 15 things, and you can do these 14 things to this one kind of schema. But then now all of a sudden you're putting in a schema's checker or Google's schema checker, and you're getting errors because you've got duplications. So, you know, even though it tells you can have all the different components within, as you build the schema out, that's when you start getting errors and duplications. And there's warnings and there's errors. Warnings is something that Google's saying, hey, we're not really paying attention to this. you need to fix this. An error will cause all of that schema to not be indexed. So when you're doing the schema checker, which I'll show you guys, there's certain ways to do things and check things, and you can change within the checker. But yeah, schema.org is a great place to start, especially if you've got something new. So like I just did a bid for a bakery. Well, I've never done anything food related. So or restaurant related. So I started at schema.org. I just started typing in restaurant. What can I do under restaurant? Baker. Is there anything under baker? Chef. I mean, so you basically have to start out and start building this cobweb of stuff that allows you to do, and then kind of figure out where you're going to start. So that's why I said schema is a whole different thing. As far as we turned it into an a la carte thing about 6 months ago, because it can be so big. I did a schema bid for an attorney that has 47 lawyers. So, I mean, this schema would probably take us a month, because there's just a whole much. But, do they feel it's important enough to pay that much money? We'll see, so the nice thing about schema is typically once you do a schema for a service page, you probably don't ever have to go back to that service page again on the schema side, unless you find something new that works, you can go add to it or whatever. But
I like the way you referred to it as coding, like it's its own language. Obviously I've played with it too. I am not on your level, but comfortable enough to be able to do it. And I think that's a great parallel, whether it's like, writing HTML or PHP or whatever anybody out there kind of knows for their own coding. I mean, that's how you're doing it. You're not just typing it like a Word doc or like a WordPress on page update. It's a method of coding. It's its own language, if you will, right? To get it to work right. And like you said, I think it's going to get discontinued, but I guess if people want to either A, check out their own schema if they're messing around, or B, if you're sitting there wondering, like, do I even have this on my website? Is my web dude doing schema? Just Google structured data testing tool. You should find the Google page. I'll put a link to it in the show notes direct, but if you just Google structured data testing tool, you'll get to the Google page where you can plug in your website or your code to test it out. And like Terry's saying, it's going to tell you if there's errors or warnings and kind of how egregious the problems are. But I believe they're still discontinuing that.
They're going to keep.
So
they're going to keep this tool.
Oh, they are now.
Oh,
Okay.
wow.
Yeah,
Sweet.
they came out, I think it was a week ago, that said they got so much backlash.
Right.
Because they take away all of our good tools. Like I said, fetch and render was my favorite tool. I used to get so much business because I would show people that their Divi website wouldn't crawl all the way.
This is where it was getting stuck right here.
Yeah, it would get stuck about 40% down on almost every single page. And
right.
And that's unfortunate. I mean, we're taught in the SEO world to put your most important stuff to the top, but still there's stuff at the bottom that's important too. So
right.
But
let's pause there and kind of come back. I think there's something there to parse out for everybody. I think two things. One, so Google doesn't always necessarily, even though they can find your page, they may not have digested or crawled all the information on that page because they can get stopped somewhere. And I think you and I were talking before in a conversation, and you put it really well, like, they're crawling this page, and if they find an error and they stop, they're not going to skip over. They don't know where to pick up next. They just stop, like, okay, done, on to the next page. They've got better things to do. And if you had content that was important, past that stop point, you're kind of screwed. And
exactly.
Again, that's where, like you're saying, put your schema up in the head, guaranteed to be crawled every time, even if you have a stop point on your page or an error. At least you're communicating all the schema stuff then, right? If nothing else.
Yeah, at least Google and Yahoo and Bing and everybody are understanding what your page is about.
Right.
And that's the most important thing. One of the things, especially the way some websites are built, it's very hard from just the code part to understand a web page. So, especially if they're not using alt tags and they've overstuffed their header. I mean, it's just, if you think about it from a code crawling point of view, I mean, it's some of the stuff Googlebot probably just see and said, "Oh God, this is a mess. I'm out of here." I mean, it's just I mean, it's like I said, we've all got a budget, and the budget gets smaller and smaller every single day because more websites are coming on that Google's getting bandwidth. Right. So we've got to be prepared with that to make sure that Google's crawling the stuff that we want to be crawled. And if they miss stuff, then we're okay with that. Hopefully they'll get it on the second time around. But unfortunately, we don't have a tool anymore that'll go out and give us that issue. We can go see, you can test it. You can put a major keyword, move your H1 from the top of your page to the bottom of the page and see if it affects your rankings. Probably the fastest way to do it. But we don't have a tool like we did with fetch and render to be able to say, man, this page just isn't moving. I wonder why. And now all of a sudden we see, oh, well, it's not even getting to the body. There's something in the, Google Tag Manager used to throw off a lot of errors. And so the bot would just stop because there was something in the Tag Manager that didn't finish and it didn't know what to do. So it would leave. So, but yeah, that's what I think. That's why I'm so passionate about Schema, because I can kind of tell a better story in Schema than I can on the public side of the website.
And this is a pretty decent spot to leave off with part 1 of our interview with Terry Samuels. Hopefully you folks are getting a lot of information out of this. There's a lot to unpack, but there are a lot of great nuggets in here, and we're hoping you're looking forward to part 2 in our next episode of Local SEO Tactics. Also, in our next episode, we'll get to reading our new 5-star review. So just a quick reminder for you folks that our free instant SEO audit tool is on our website, where you can quickly audit your website and check your SEO against any keyword you're targeting. It's totally free. You can get it by going to localseotactics.com and clicking the yellow button that says free SEO audit. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you with part 2 just a little bit down the road.